Yeah, when you say I've been CEO, you sound like I was CEO yesterday. I've not been CEO of any MTN company for the last 7 years at least. So um, I think that, especially given my experience after leaving MTN, I've been involved in a lot of other sectors and sitting on several boards. And I look at what the role of the private sector should be in terms of economic growth. I think that just if we step back a bit and if you look at the GDP equation today, consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus minus net exports, imports, whatever. I think that what has become very clear is that the private sector is responsible in terms of investments, direct investments, and also for stimulating you consumption because that's where innovation comes in. So you can easily say that out of that whole GDP equation, the private sector is probably responsible for at least 75% of that. At least. Depends on the economy. I don't know the exact numbers in Nigeria. I need to check. But at least 75% of that. So it's absolutely critical. The engine of growth for any economy is the private sector. The amount of investments it makes into different sectors, not just foreign, because I know we talk a lot about FDI, but also local investments as well. You know, local and foreign investment is the investments that are created that enable you to create the right kind of industries, companies that stimulate economic activity, that stimulate employment, that stimulate growth and wealth. So the private sector is indeed the engine of growth in any economy. And I think that if you look across Africa, you are beginning to see more and more. Most governments are now beginning to recognize that more and more. So, I mean, for example, in Ethiopia has been a closed economy for a long time, but they brought in a second operator last year, I think Safaricom, and they're now trying to license a third operator. You know, and if you look at across other sectors of the economy, more and more governments are realizing that the heart of any economy is the private sector. If the private sector is not working, you're not going to generate the tax revenues that the government used to run itself. So I think that in terms of engagement, I would look at it from a broader private sector engagement point of view. I think you already have a lot of industry groups. The telcos have theirs, Manufacturer Association of Nigeria, and the like. But I think that generally speaking, there probably needs to be a lot more robust engagement with governments in terms of expectations. What do we in private sector expect governments to do? How do we expect them to make things easier to enable people to continue to invest in the economy? I think we read not too long ago, one of the companies, GSK, has been here for 51 years, has left the country. I mean, there's no guarantee. You can't stop people from leaving the economy if they don't feel like there's the right enabling environment for that. So I think it's more of engagement. And that engagement needs to be consistent, and it needs to be structured, and it needs to be result oriented, and it needs to be across the economy. It's not about just telecom. Telecom is just a part of the larger economy. If the economy is not growing, then telecom growth will be stunted to some extent. So it's really about how well or how more does the private sector engage in terms of clarity, engaging governments, especially new governments when they come into power, on what the expectations are and how they can work together to achieve those expectations in terms of growth in the overall economy. In the early days, there were very, very, very high expectations of this industry. Very high. Because we were in a situation where pent up demand, people needed to communicate. People were hungry for communication. So there was a very high pent-up demand. You remember all the glitz around the mobile auction, the $285 million paid, and all that. And you saw that in those early years, there was a lot of focus around, first of all, there was a lot of hoopla about pricing. I'm sure you remember, oh, the tariffs are too high, the SIMs were too expensive, airtime was too expensive. And I think it also talked about the resilience of the industry, because I think at that time there was a lot of engagement, even with people like you in the media, with the National Assembly, to explain that this is a new industry. It will take time to evolve. And as it evolves and as competition becomes more intense, you now begin to see barriers becoming lower, and those things get translated in terms of value to the consumer. And then there was a time when there was a lot of focus around quality of service, expectedly so, because you had a lot more people coming onto the network than the network could build. And I think over the years, it was tough in those early years, but I think again it was important that in a lot of the operating companies, I think it was clear to, at least to me then, that we had a national assignment to deliver. It was as simple as that. It was high expectations on the industry. The regulators were under pressure. The operators were under pressure. You had to build the ecosystems. You had to build the right kind of partners, suppliers, vendors, and get everybody to learn at the same time. So I think that there was a lot of expectations on the industry. And over the years, yeah, there are other issues. I'm sure the operators can speak a lot more about all the normal issues of right of way and all of that. But I think that at the high level, there was a lot of expectation, and I think that over the years, I believe that the industry has earned a lot more trust, from the consumers, and from the economy at large, because I think more and more people could understand a lot more what it entailed to build a network, and the pressures that the operators were under. And I think over the years, the industry has endured a lot more trust. Maybe because other things in the economy haven't worked as well. So you look at it and say, well, maybe in the larger scheme of things, telecom has done much better than other sectors. But I think that there was a lot of expectation. And I think so far, it appears to me that the industry has earned a lot more trust. And it still has to work harder to earn even more trust, because, like we said, in the digital economy where everybody is reliant on the platforms, then the expectations are going to be a lot higher. I think that one of the things that I probably have not read a lot about, I know we talk about, the telecom revolution a lot, and what has happened. But I think one area we probably may not, we probably, I think is important, is in the area of human capacity development. So if you think about it this way, I mean, in 2001, the biggest industries were the FMCGs, the banks, and the oil companies, right? Especially the oil companies, they were the biggest, those were the largest industries. Um, what has happened in the last 22 years is, with the kind of growth that we've seen in the telecom industry, has been a lot of investment in human capital. So a whole new crop of young people, some of us not so young anymore, who joined the industry then, a whole new set of people in the telecom sector. You have more telecom engineers, electronic engineers. You have more people who are adept at power solutions. So, for example, today South Africa is all crying about power outage and all that. We've been dealing with that for 20 years. This industry has been run like that way for 20 years. Think about it. 22 years. We've never had power. So you've had a lot of professionals in the power space. You've had a lot of marketing professionals. If you think about what has happened in the whole marketing communications industry on account of what has happened in telecom, and the innovation space. So when you think about it and you think about the crop of talent that has been developed in this industry, be they in the operating companies, a lot of them have now spun into the other subsectors like the tower industries, the infrastructure industries, the over the top industries. So today you find out that apart from the core telco people who work with the operators, um, those you are developing a new crop of those kind of people. They are working in other entities across telco entities, not just within the parent companies, but also across the world. You're seeing a lot of new talent. I see a lot of our talent, people I know who are my colleagues or some juniors who are now working in new industries. So can you imagine what's happening in electricity? A lot of this talent that you have in telecom is now funneling into electricity. We're seeing people going into fintech. Lua Komu just left OPay. He was part of MTN at the early days, worked in banking for so many years. Now with fintech, people like Wale Goodluck, who at some point was in telecom, headed GSMA in Africa, and a lot of other younger colleagues that are littering the whole economic landscape, other industries. I think we forget about that. And that's very significant. That's very significant. Even on a personal level, I'm a lawyer by training, got into the telco industry, worked in MTN, had an opportunity to be going to commercial sales and distribution and had an opportunity to go into executive management. That has completely changed my own career trajectory many years after I've left the company. So if you think about those kind of stories, this industry has built a lot of human capacity. And I run into them a lot these days. I mean, they're in the pensions industries, they're in the fintech industries. Everywhere you go to, you meet one of your former staff. Hey, Oga, we're here. So I think it's something we don't talk enough about, but I think it's something that is very, 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 very interesting. And also how the telecom industry has inspired other newer industries. So if you look at what has happened in fintech, if you look at what has happened in renewable, I think a lot of what has been done in telecom has provided a kind of blueprint for newer industries to copy. And those are the kind of, for me, personal milestones and memories that I run across and I see is the quality of the people and the value that they are adding, and all of this talent all comes back into this economy one way or the other. So I think that for me is those are kind of key milestones, personal milestones that I always relish on, as far as what this industry has produced over this last 22 years. I think that if we go back to our earlier discussion about how this is not a linear industry that focuses on providing basic communication services, it is now providing the platform to support a digital economy. I think if you think about it from that perspective, then you begin to understand how critical this industry has become. So, like I argued earlier on that if you try to quantify the value of this industry in terms of telecom as a percentage of GDP, it may not give you a full and a fair picture of how important it is, because you are providing the platform to support other sectors of the economy. So I think that if you think about it that way, it becomes absolutely critical that the sector needs to be given a lot more priority. And I think that over the years, in most African markets, you find out that there are some ministries in quote that are given a lot more priority. You have Ministry of Economy, the Finance, and there are some prized ministries. And generally speaking, you find out that the communication and digital economy tend not to be in the tier A ministries, if I want to put it that way. Um, I think that needs to change. I think that needs to change because a lot of what is going to be happening in terms of economic development is going to be happening in the digital economy. And this is what is being driven. And I'm happy that the Ministry of Communication is now called Ministry of Digital Economy, I believe, digital economy. And I'm also quite excited at the list of ministers. I think we're seeing Dr. Tijani is being nominated. I don't know. I hope he goes to the communications ministry or the digital economy ministry because that will be putting, I think, the square peg in a square hole. But so I think that perspective just needs to change. It needs to be seen not as a linear industry. It needs to be seen as an industry that powers the economy. So with that in mind, you would find out that a lot of things that pertain to the industry will now start having cross industry implications. So regulatory, for example, today telcos are now having fintech arms of businesses. So they have new kinds of regulators. They have to deal with different arms of agencies, state bodies, state organizations, and other NDAs across the space. So you now have a multi-regulator type environment from what we had 22 years ago. So I think that it's going to be really critical around understanding the ramifications of what this digital economy entails and how to support this industry that provides the underlying backbone and of course the new ecosystems that are emerging in the innovation space and all of that, how you bring all that together. And it's still just going to it's going to depend on the right kind of policy and regulatory support. And it's going to have to be more bespoke. It can't be just talking about digital economy at a high level. Yes, we want to promote digital economy. What does that really mean? And what does that entail? And what do the stakeholders in the industry need to make that happen? And then you hold the stakeholders accountable in terms of course, there are regulatory requirements and all that. That doesn't change. But I think the dialogue just needs to be a lot tighter and it needs to be a lot more clinical. I'll kind of put them in four quick buckets, the way I see it, in terms of what are the key lessons learned, um, in terms of building successful organizations that have played in this space. I think the first thing is obviously the policy and regulatory support. So if you look at this industry, and I must give kudos to the frameworks that were set at the beginning of this industry. The industry started much earlier, but I think the digital mobile auction actually provided a good platform for what we have seen today. And I think if you recall at that time, Shino, there was a lot of very, very strong political and policy support. So the government was very clear about what they intended to achieve. The NCC was very empowered. We had, great Nigerians like late Ahmed Joda, who chaired the NCC at the time. Engineer Ernest Ndukwe, who I think today is chairman of MTN board, was EVC at the time. And I was fortunate because I was working in NCC at the time and I was acting company secretary. So I kind of saw a lot of what evolved and I saw a lot of what happened and a lot of work that was put behind the scene by some of these gentlemen and a lot of the staff that were behind them at the time to make these things happen. So it's critical once you have the right kind of policy and regulatory environment that creates certainty. You remember at the time, I think MTN Group probably took its biggest bet at that time by betting on Nigeria. And the bet that I think has paid off extremely handsomely for them. So I think that's obviously the first starting point. I think the second key thing is having committed investors who believe in the market. Um, and committed investors mean investors that are looking at the market, they believe in the market, they believe in the potentials, and they continuously invest in the opportunities. And I think you've seen that if you look at the telecom landscape, even across Africa and even in Nigeria, you find out that there are fewer and fewer players. The players who have outlasted others are those that remain committed to the markets and have continuously invested through the life cycle of the growth of the industry. And I think the third thing is those investors have built strong companies, solid companies, good governance, get the right kind of leaders, great cultures. And those are the companies that are enduring today and are playing a key role in terms of providing the kind of infrastructure and support that we're seeing. And then lastly is the issue about for every successful telco or indeed any other business, being very close to the market, understanding what the market needs, and being able to provide that. I think you can see that across Africa. So, for example, I was CEO in MTN Ghana at the time, about 10 years ago when we decided to go into mobile money fully because it was a virgin area at that time. There was a clear need for it. It was a clear opportunity to differentiate the business at that time. And we focused heavily on it, of course, learning from what Safaricom had done with M-Pesa. And today, that business is a very significant part of the portfolio of that company today. So I think these are really the key lessons. Just once there's the right environment, there's the right regulatory policy support, getting the right kind of investors who believe in the market and commit to building great organizations, and being sensitive to the opportunities in the market and continue to invest behind them. Okay, thank you, Shino. I think that I listened to the speech also, and we've had stuff like that before. I mean, come on, we've had those are, in my view, political statements. Because when you say you promise 1 billion jobs, or yeah, that's fine at a manifesto level. I think what now needs to be done is how do you translate that into reality? How do you translate that into reality? And that's why I talked about being a lot more clinical. And that's where I think also as private sector, we need to hold the government to account. So what does it mean to create 1 million jobs in this sector? What does that exactly mean? How is it going to happen? What are the key drivers? What are the enablers that need to happen? What needs to be put in place? And I think that's where, in a lot of ways, just to reemphasize the point about, how we from a private sector point of view, and this is across the economy, this is not just telcos, how we need to engage, with government. I think that if we're looking at every sector, there are kind of 3 broad things you can look at in terms of clear output. Number 1 is investment. So if there's a clear objective to say you want to create, you want to do whatever, how much investment is required? So I gave you a number of what I read with McKinsey and Company. That needs to be fact-checked. That needs to be interrogated. It needs to be clear how much investment is going to be attracted. If you do not attract the investments, you are not going to create the jobs. It's as simple as that. So we need to ensure how much investments are going to be, how much needs to be attracted into what sector, into what subsector, what needs to be done to make it happen. Okay. Secondly is the issue about output. So what is the outcome we are looking at? How do we measure deliverables? I think we need to start holding the public sector a lot more to account on deliverables. If you're in the private sector and you run a business, I sit on a lot of boards, and we hold our CEOs and our management accountable. If you don't deliver on the job, then we have a question to answer. So if we're saying we're going to develop sectors what output are we expecting? If it's power sector, how many megawatts of power do we expect over so much period of time, given the amount of investment we talked about? Then also related to output is how much export opportunities do we see? We should start looking, obviously, export-led growth is going to be a key part of how we begin to change the trajectory of our economy. So that comes in output. And then the third area, which is where the president talked about, is jobs. What is the resultant effect of that? So it's a bit too simplistic to say you're going to create 1 million jobs. You have to focus on how much investment, what will that enable, what will that create, and then how many jobs are you going to create? And I think that's the kind of engagement that I think needs to happen across every sector in our economy, because our economy is underperforming. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, the last couple of years, probably last 8 years, our economy has been underperforming. And there's no one sector that will grow faster. I mean, the telecom or the digital sector can grow, it's healthy enough, but the point is that you will always be restricted by the overall growth of the overall economy. So I think there is something about how do we hold the president and this administration to account. And he has actually come out to say, yes, he wants to be held to account. So we just need to do that. We need to do the groundwork around translating the big, broad political promises and platitudes into clear actions. And with responsibilities for everybody, I'm sure, both on the private and the public sector. And I think that's how we can make things happen. I think that one of the things I am I sit on a few boards of two of fintech companies, both in Nigeria and with an Africa footprint. And I think one of the things that really fascinates me or excites me about what you see in the innovation space is just the sheer creativity of our people, of our young people. It's just amazing. A lot of creativity, um, a lot of grit, getting, just plodding along and getting things done. So I think that that fearlessness in terms of creativity, in terms of innovation, is something that is very exciting to see. And I think you've seen a lot of the young companies, fintech companies like, well, InterSwitch is it's not a young company anymore. They're 20 years or so. Flutterwave, the Flutterwaves of this world, some of the newer companies that have been in carbon, the guys into fintech, the guys into logistics. A lot of companies that are doing exciting digital things, doing exciting things in the digital space. I remember attending one of the seminars and the whole a conference, and all we were focusing on, all that was being discussed was about how to solve problems. How do we solve problems across the economy? How do we make people get things done quicker, more efficiently, based on the realities of what is happening on ground? So I think that the whole area around solutions and services and innovation is just exciting. And for my advice for them is, just keep challenging and extending, doing the impossible. And I think we're already seeing great examples coming out from Nigeria. A lot of our entrepreneurs are doing exciting, great things across the continent. So just keep doing great things, keep doing great things. And I think the challenge is, how do we create an environment where we keep most of them? Because I think, as you know, Japa is now the new reality where a lot of people are living, and to some extent, understandably so. So how do we create an atmosphere and environment where we can continue to keep the best and brightest minds, to keep doing exciting, innovative things, creating new products, creating new services, creating things that can help to just make digital a way of life, and that can make this country a lot more productive, make people's lives easier, make people's lives happier. So it's just really exciting, especially on the services space. I used to be a lot more in the the platform and network side of things, but the services space is just really exciting.